All right, why don't we get started, folks? We're giving everybody kind of a nice 5 minute grace period, and everybody's links are working. So that's a good sign. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Karlansky, and I'm the president of Monarch Information Security Consulting. Today we have with us Mike Snyder with Monarch as well, and he's going to be talking about system security plans. This is the third in our series. Our first one was about contracts. Our second episode regarded scoping. Now we're into system security plans. And the other two, if you missed them, are actually on our YouTube channel. I'll post a link to that in the chat while we're going along here. But otherwise, I'm going to hand this over to Mike, and Mike will talk for 30 to 45 minutes or so, maybe longer, seeing how he goes. And then we'll open it up for questions as long as we need to. Go ahead, Mike.
No, tweaking these one session at a time. We got to get down to just questions. So, as Joe said, thank you for coming back. If it's your first time, yes, we're going to go from talking about contracts. And last time we talked about assets and doing our asset inventories. And that leads us right into the best part and the hardest part of probably doing between scoping and setting up your SSP or your system security plan to that. We're actually going to talk through it today. Or I should say maybe hopefully talk through it today. It's a heavy topic. So inside the webinar for today, I wanted to keep it very simple and get to questions so Joe wouldn't beat me up about taking too long and talking all the time. But the main part is going through and actually knowing what do we have to do by the program requirements. This is the big thing. We know DFAR 7012. It did have some basic requirements, but those requirements came directed right at using NIST 800 and NIST SP 800-171, which would have led us right to the requirement for the SSP, but there were some inherent flaws in that, and scoring was changed and all kinds of stuff happened. So if you have time to go to the rule, you heard me last time, every time I probably get into one of these sessions, I'm going to tell you about some things that are changed inside the new rules and what that correlates to. And for this session in the SSP. So I'm going to go through those two little quick snippets and one that we've been talking about probably for the last 2 weeks. And then I'm going to move into the actual system security plan requirements as outlined in the CMMC Level 2 assessment guide. And then we'll go, I have a couple references real quick where you can go to get some templates. And then one of my favorite products that I found out about in this last 6 months. And then questions, the best part of this. The CMMC rule gave us one thing that we probably didn't see before. It was kind of hidden in different parts of the text. If you heard me last time, I kind of went into the FIPS 199 and 200 are where a lot of stuff come from, but it doesn't give you this solid. In the rule, they actually gave us what is a system security plan. The definitions were in the glossary of CMMC. They're in glossaries everywhere else, but it is really kind of stripped down like, hey, it's a document that has a high level overview of your security requirements. But here they actually gave you, it provides an overview of those security requirements of the system, right? But it describes the security controls that are in place or planned and how they meet the requirement. I've seen people do it different ways, and we'll talk about that today. But that high level overview is the key. And then I wanted people, if you're going through the rule or you even go through the CMMC guide, I'm going to point out these specific areas that are suggestions, but they're not requirements. Inside the rule, it says the plan can also contain supporting documentation. Doesn't mean it needs to be in there. The assessor may look at it, may not, but the idea is you don't have to tie it to that document. You're going to hear most assessors say that that SSP should be, I like to call them catalogs, but there are catalogs of your controls and how you do them. And they should lead you, and through the assessment, me or the other assessors on the team, they're going to lead us to how you do your normal day-to-day operations with those controls, those implementations. Of course, I could read over them all, but they're the basic. You could have a configuration management plan. Incident response, I think we all know there's some form, way, shape within every organization for incident response. And then those inter-system connecting agreements, so your ISP agreements, stuff that you would have that shows how it's supposed to be done by that person you bought a service from. And of course, if you didn't notice inside the slides, I've been trying to do this every time, but Joe, I don't think I've highlighted this. Those, I have references and keywords. Those keywords normally mean it's tied to something or there's something special about those words. Overview, you're supposed to only do an overview, or you're only required to do an overview of that requirement as you go through the SSP. And then it can contain, I like making sure everybody understands that it says can. It doesn't say must and shall, will. It says it could or it can. So pay, and then I pushed it back to where they get some of these terms from and where they're pulling different things. You'll notice in the rule, there's a whole section on, where certain things are derived from. They're not part of the rule itself. It's just supplemental guidance that they've used and kind of brought into the rule. They're from either other federal programs or cross public programs that we've seen before. Continuing on with my considerations, this has been the hot topic, I think, for the last year and a half, 2 years, but it's slowly, it's been cranked up a little bit more and more. If you went through the rule, you notice that each one of the assessments has this tied to it. Doesn't matter if it's a self-assessment, a level 2 self, or C3PO assessment, or even level 3. They're all tied to this. If you have this cloud provider, you have this requirement. That's always been there. It's just that they finally drew it out and gave you some guidance that kind of flows right into your asset management, or while you're going through the CMMC practices within the assessment guide. You'll notice where it tells you have to label these assets. And if you have a cloud service provider, you need to have this. But the key to this one is that customer responsibilities matrix, or you may hear, I like saying shared responsibilities, because there's shared responsibilities between you and an MSP, a CSP, any external service that's doing something for you. Again, I'm listing the paragraphs out. So if you want to go right back and look, there's more to that paragraph than I just wanted if you're looking for the FedRAMP equivalency requirement and cloud service providers, what the assessment details are, these 3 paragraphs within the rule are where that comes into play, and what you have to do to document it. There's some parts you got to put in your SSP, other parts you just have to have that cloud service, your responsibilities matrix between the 2 organizations. Okay, CMMC assessment, the actual plan, the requirements. When you do your system security plan, what are the requirements by level 2? Level 1, we don't have the requirement at all. My training that I've done before, I always tell people it's a good time to start while you're doing just FCI or level 1, and you have these basic requirements. Start with your system security plan and develop it to your organization. But in level 2, we don't have a choice. We're given these common tasks that everybody should be able to just fill out, which is it has to be developed. You have to have some way, shape, form. It has to have everything in there. System boundary is defined. We have a descriptive paragraph, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we move through the other slides, because I know some people are like, do I have to put everything? Do I not? What actually has to go in there? The other thing is, I've seen people go down the security requirements and you kind of stop, like, what do they actually want? And what do I need to put in here? But the one thing they neglect ever, you can put a policy statement, whatever it is, but it needs to be actually approved. Keyword is being approved. You can't just throw something in there. We implemented an admin policy, but that admin policy is still sitting in my drafts folder. It's not actually approved. And then, of course, most of us have seen, you got to describe in some detail how that security requirement control is actually implemented within each one of the requirements inside your system security plan. The other thing
Hey,
is,
Mike, I think there's people in the waiting room looking to get in. I'm sorry, I don't have view on that anymore. I gave up host and I can't see the thing. John just messaged me. Sorry, folks.
I know when I put it on my right-hand screen, they should be coming in. I'm just going to leave the window open so I can see it over here. We're in there one week at one of these sessions at a time. And then, so just moving right on to this, I am down to objective golf or G, depending on which terminology you use, but the frequency that system security plan is defined. This is another one of those organizationally defined, but of course they gave us some tips and tricks. It should be at least annually. Assessors are going to look that if you say periodically, or you want to use that generic term because it's all over the place, that is it at least done annually. And then, of course, it is updated based on that frequency. When you get to your system security plan or any other document that you're doing revision history, and you're actually trying to show, you should have some kind of documentation of that revision history and that it's actually following your at least yearly. If it's done before, good. If it's done after, well, what happened? They're going to ask you why there's big gaps if you have them. Again, you can see my keywords, high level. This policy implements these controls. It can be really quick statements as long as it leads us to those controls and how they're getting done. But you don't have to put everything inside the SSP. And then, of course, we want all those security requirements. Don't skip over something. Don't delete it out. You have to have all the security requirements. Even if you put a general statement, see this policy for our implementation guidance or our requirement, our approved policy on this requirement. All right, now I'm going to start breaking it down. So upfront, those are the objective level requirements. But I've been on many calls. I've talked to a lot of people. And my first question is, have you gone to the CMMC level 2 guide and got past objective level? Those list out of what you need to do. Have you gone down? Don't get me wrong, the discussion's pretty good, but it came from the NIST and the original 800-171 in the alpha. We know where it came from. Everybody's had trouble with that. But now we get this further discussion, and same setup. The rule is set up this way, and so is the CMMC assessment guide. It tells you what must be included and then what is suggested. So pay close attention. We, as a default, that high level description has to be in there. Physical, don't forget to explain when it asks for logical and physical or digital and paper. You got to put both on there, not just one. I think that gets a lot of people because you may not process paper, but then say we don't process paper media. Whatever it is, show how you meet that requirement. And then approved. I'm going to say this multiple times because the assessor is going to ask you, how was it approved? Don't put something on there that you're going to implement or you are planning on it or it just never actually went through the approval process. It's done. It's just nobody's ever done it. The paperwork part of it, getting the policy approved. Or if it's at your level, then make sure that's defined somewhere. A lot of us are probably used to hearing delegation of authority or something bringing that power to sign something, approve something down to your level or somewhere from the data owner or the contract owner down far enough that it can be signed. Explain that to the assessor or anybody, or you can even have it in your SSP. Remember, there's a list of responsible people, and we're going to have those throughout our documents. But starting with that in the SSP kind of defines for the assessor and your organization who is responsible at what level. Of course, I got a little ahead of myself on that one, but having people assigned to those controls or a group of controls so that you know who is supposed to be doing them before I get to a policy. Like I said, it's a catalog for your organization. A lot of people say it's an assessor or assessment guide. It's really not. If you build it to your organization and what you do every day and it helps you, the people working there, it will work great for the assessment. If you build it just for the assessment, the assessors may have, a little bit less time they spend reading stuff, but overall you're going to struggle going through the assessment because it's not really yours. You just built it for the assessment. And then of course, frequencies, you can see I highlighted it. Everything that's highlighted in here is the key and normally what people forget. We'll define it some places and then we'll forget to put it in SSP. It's in a policy. It says we have to do it annually. Then when I get to SSP and I read those requirements, it's not really there, or it has a different time frame. It'll say 6 months instead of a year. Make sure your stuff matches. I normally look for policy statements that implement it and then technical statements that implement technical controls. Again, this comes out of the level 2 guide CA.L2-3.12.4. And again, if you're like kind of new to it, you've never set one up, or you're trying to do I know Lewis heard me say this when we were out doing one of our other sessions, mapping to other frameworks, you're going to notice some of the language sounds somewhat the same. Use that same language. But one of the good things is 800-18 kind of helps you with system security plans and having the ability. And guess what? It's referenced in most NIST documentations, whether it's CSF 53. So try to, if you have multiple frameworks or you started on another framework and you're trying to make CMMC or 800-171 line up, this is a good place to start because it starts at I don't want to say generic, but the basic level of what the requirement and what you should put in, and then you can tie your different pieces together. I know you're like, man, everything that we do has got to be based off of those guides and everything else. There's nothing else we can tell you. The assessors are going to go off the guides. Everything I listed out is on the slide. Like I said, I always get ahead of myself on these slides trying to get through. But one of the other questions, and I know this comes from academic and large organizations, giant primes, is how do I break up the contract? Or how do I show that I have different environments, but they're still all underneath my same maybe SSP? Multiple ways you can do this. Just like when we talked about asset inventories and doing everything else, you could have a high level enterprise SSP that you inherit, down to those lower enclaves or whatever you want to call them, but those broken up different zones, different environments that may have some different physical requirements, or they might have technical controls that are different between, I'm going to use a university since Lewis is here, that you have a university, right? And they might have different types of projects. One's an engineering project, one's a research project. And those facilities are going to inherently have different stuff, but they're inheriting those enterprise controls. You can use the enterprise SSP and reference that as how you meet the controls down in the other SSP. Or you could use a shared responsibilities matrix showing how those go across the environment. It's up to you, but just showing it, I think this is a lot of confusion for people. Do I really reinvent the wheel? Do I build a giant SSP for every environment, even though the enterprise is, supporting most of it? You can build just one enterprise SSP and then have accompanying documentation for those environments. And then just say it inherits from enterprise SSP and just give the requirement. I could go on, as everybody knows, forever about the differences in environments. And of course, you're going to have to scope your own and figure out what's the most effective economical. The approaches are going to be crazy as we go into the CMMC assessments and doing the certifications. But I take a look at it from that approach. You're going to find some contracts don't require everything like others. They might just have FCI. They may some are going to have high level CUI where the others just have basics. So we have specified and basic, and those specified can come with some additional, as some of us know, they may require that you're in, say, a high FedRAMP environment versus CUI or basic and certain categories are only going to require a moderate level. So keep that in mind. And I know some between universities and major companies, organizations, they do have separate environments. They process proprietary and basic level CUI or basic contract data in a commercial cloud or their own local environment. And then they put everything else in a GCC high or a gov cloud or some, elevated control set. So just keep that in mind. You can separate them just like that. All right. So I said I'll give some resources. And when it comes to resources, you could probably Google system security plan and go, wow, what am I supposed to do here? There's a lot of companies that do them. My first recommendation is to start with a template. I do have the link on here for the NIST 800 171 SSP template. However, when Joe uploads, I will give Joe the revised one that I made for CMMC. So you don't have to go back in there and change all the terminology and, put the identifier dot whatever the NIST originally had. I think that'll help out a little bit. And then on top of that, Carnegie Mellon has a free template. They've been through a mock CMMC assessment. They do know, but again, theirs is based on 171, not a big ordeal. It's still the same, but you'll notice theirs is kind of a little generic as well. There's other programs, agencies that will give you somewhat the different templates that they're going to work to get you started. But with that being said, the best place to start is in your organization. If you already have some kind of system security plan or a plan that outlines what your current controls and techniques for doing what you do every day, start with that, try to get it together. That's going to help you. And then figure out what template is where you want to start. There's all different kinds. Trust me when I say I've seen them. I can tell you, I would not personally pay for a template unless somebody's doing the work for you. It's going to have the data input and it's built on you. That's one of the reasons I tell everybody start with the NIST or something that's blank, because it just tells you the requirement and kind of like gives you the places to fill it out. It has some generic verbiage that meets up with the requirements that kind of gives you examples of how to do it. But overall, the other ones that are filled in are going to have a lot of jargon inside of them, or somebody else already filled them out. If you borrow it from somebody, please, please, please review every single line inside that SSP if they gave you their template. I've been on many assessments where you will start reading and it's supposed to be, Smithco. And as we're reading, it says Dell Tech or it says some other company because that's either who generated it for them or that's where they got it from. And they didn't change any of the terminology. That instantly sets the assessor as, man, how diligent were they? Is this actually their SSP? Or did they just do, find, replace, and just try to change out some of the names and they missed them? So keep that in mind. I'm not saying it's sometimes easier. If you look just like the other organization, just make sure you go through line by line and your stuff is in there. Then, of course, as usual, I put the proposed rule and I think starting with those guides, every time you hear me with a guide, they do have a lot of details in there. You just have to read through it, or you can always come back to us and ask us some questions. And we are full of tons of information. I don't know that I want it all in my head, but I can't get rid of it. So here we are. And now
I just wanted to add in there in the line by line review. Sorry, make sure you do the headers and footers too.
yes, good. I'm telling you, good point, John. That is true. You will see that a lot. All right, so I've been kind of on my perch with this for a while. We have tons of resources, and I wish I would have known about this before working with Monarch and doing everything else. But how to rate an SSP, how do you do this? I took this right from Monarch's Catapult, right off the website. I've used this, well, Joe, I think I'm up to like my 5th one now. But as you go through Catapult, which is their tool, it's Monarch's tool, we use it here. A lot of OCs use it, and it is fundamentally probably one of the easiest tools to use as far as 171 CMMC goes, because it walks you through each one of your controls. It asks you a ton of questions. And then in the end, guess what you get? You get policy statements, policy documents, and an SSP. That is what you built. It's not somebody else made it up. It's exactly what you have for that requirement, but it goes through each one of the objective level requirements But on top of that, it doesn't just ask you the generic question of, do you have a system in place to track users, devices? It's actually going to go, what tool do you have? It gives some drop downs. And then from there, the minute you select something, it asks additional questions, unlike a lot of the other tools we've seen. Joe already knows I've been on this preaching this to a lot of people because I think it helps you understand what the assessor is going to ask. And it also helps you build your information at the exact same time. You can see my little snippet here. I just went in and plugged in some information, just seriously, so simple. I use Active Directory or Entra ID to do this. I have this amount of users. Whatever you would normally do to fill out that, it's going to ask you, but you also are doing your readiness at the exact same time. You're filling out your assessment and it spits out data. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. And it's Joe, everybody gets to try level 1 for free. So you can check it out, see if it works for you or not. But I think for people that are starting, it's a well-priced, easy to use tool that is exactly what the assessor would ask you and help your organization get through something. The link's there. And of course, if you've been to the website, you've probably seen it up at the top and you might not know what it is. But I want to point out that it does do a lot of the documentation for you as when you get done with each one of the requirements. I got to stop, Joe. I will promise I will stop talking about Catapult. Again, I said this on the last session, beat Joe up about this. I know a lot of people have asked for it. It's one of the things I wanted to do for the longest time is mix the CCP class with everybody from an OSC. Anybody can come to it and we'll actually talk implementation. We will do the quick certification class and then we're going to focus on just for OCs, ask the questions. We will go through how to get through each one of those practices because the assessment training is great. The CCP training is great. It does take you over a lot of stuff. However, we do not spend time to actually take you over the implementation, what is actually required here, how much documentation. That's what the CCP Plus class is going to be for. So we'll see how this one goes in September. But if you were curious, I don't really want to take the certification, but I really like to know what the assessor is going to ask me here. I would like to know if this actually meets it. That's what Joe's built his class for. So check it out. The link is there. And then, as I said, I was going to try to get to questions as quick as possible because I think that's where we're going to find out the most of what we need to in these sessions.
Folks, you can just jump in, and if you want to raise a hand to start, we can do that, or we can just allow you to jump right in for questions. If nobody has any, I have a couple I can kind of prompt with.
Hey, Mike, this is Eric. Great info. I've got a question for you with respect to when you're developing a shared responsibility, SSP, what's your recommendation in terms of how to integrate or reference out to your various vendors' shared responsibility matrices? Should they be summarized and integrated into your SSP, direct copy paste, or some other recommendation?
I can give you my recommendation. I think all of us here at Monarch will be pretty close to each other, but maybe slight variances because we've seen different system security plans. My personal recommendation in the way I've built probably almost every one I've ever done is I will give what I do because the organization is ultimately responsible, right? The policy is enforcing what needs to be done. And then from there, if there's a requirement I want to spit out, I'm going to put that, you kind of heard me saying it there. I'm going to put a little generic blurb that says C SRM between, that your OSC and whatever the MSP, the third party organization is. And that refers not only the assessor, but your organization. If they were like, crap, what does Eric do here normally if we had an incident and, it's not our responsibility, it's the MSP's. That should lead them to your document. And there should be a link inside that SRM, or at least saying who's responsible on their side or what process they use. Your SRM is probably going to be the biggest key, but I would say just link to the SRM. I personally don't want to waste too much time with the SSP. You heard me say to me, it's like a catalog. It's for users that don't normally do that or a brand new user, admin, or anybody in the organization could go to and figure out what the next step is or what actually implements that policy procedure. But I would rather see you in your policies, procedures, or going to an SRM and go, no, that's this MSP and it's their IT help desk. And then we know that they would have the process and your IT or whoever's internal to you would know to go directly to them. There's something in place that leads everybody to the right direction. Of course,
Awesome.
John and
Thank
Joe
you.
might have some other recommendations as well.
I'm right there with you on that. Link off reference. Don't put it in two places.
Yep. I have seen people just copy paste directly into each section of the SSP and put under Microsoft or even just Microsoft responsibility, see shared responsibility matrix. So there's a clear reference right across, which is, and then, the link. Some people like to copy paste, but they're getting overly, yeah, then they're gonna have more things to update down the line.
Yes, that's a good show. I forgot about the updating.
Go ahead, Louis.
So, two questions. So the shared responsibility model could be included as an appendix or supporting documentation in the SSP. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And if you, just a caveat to that, if in the rule current, if that go, I don't think that's going to be changed. They're really big about this FedRAMP equivalency and everything else on the DoD and government side. You have the requirement to have that readily available, and you have to have, so referencing it like right up in front where you're talking about the interconnection and who does what, just put a link. This is our shared responsibilities matrix between whatever services.
So in particular, if you're using a cloud service, you can pull down their document and say, these are the pieces of it that we're responsible for. They're FedRAMP certified. Then with the assessor, for example, we're using HPC. We're going to be doing some HPC for CUI and possibly CMMC level 2. So we will have and do have a shared responsibility model in our system security plan. We could just reference to the pieces they're responsible for. Is there any due diligence necessary on our part to make sure that they're meeting the requirements?
Yes. By the rule in those paragraphs, I didn't go like in depth on them, but one of the responsibilities is that you have verified their controls are in place either through an SSP or other documentation. So as long as this is one of those things where some people, and Louis, I know you heard me talk about it while we were out doing our EduCause, but one of the biggest things a lot of people do is they will put it like in the contract, the original, like you have to meet 171 requirements before we sign a contract with you. If they did that, they're normally, that's probably, I would hope that's how you got the shared responsibilities matrix, or they might give you an attestation that they meet all 110 or their required practices requirements out of 171.
Okay, that, yeah, we do have that, and that could then be included in the documentation as our verification process versus a review of each of the controls. Okay, the second question I have is the NIST 818 that you mentioned as a system security plan. You know, we have some system security plan templates and methodologies that we use. I was just curious, does the 800-171 and the Rev 2, are there any important updates since the 818 was put out, so many years ago?
No, you're probably in the same boat as me. I think the most work was spent on 53 and some of the new implementations using 53 in the RMF process. Other than that, I tell people most of the other, if you want to call them guides or standards, they're really standards from the NIST. A lot of that reference material is if you've never done it before and you're just getting started, or you have a big program and it's program specific. Those NIST ones that like caveat, like they're for chemical control and like certain industry standards. I think those are great because you're right, they have been updated. But these other ones have, if they have been updated, they have very generic, basic stuff that just kind of gets you to today. But overall, you're right with like 18. If you already got yours in place, Louis, I would say stick with where you're at and kind of, you should be in the tweaking, try to, move it up to the next level.
I just wanted to see if I needed to go back and revisit the 18. Thank you.
That is actually a good point before. So to Lewis's question, when you see a reference inside CMMC, the guide, or even as you're going through 800-171, 53 does the same thing. There's a lot of referencing of other documentation. The idea behind that is in 171, there's not a lot of inherent put out to you requirements. And then in the reference tables, they tell you what you have to do, whether it's organizationally defined parameters. But when they call it out in CMMC, it's technically not a requirement to go to 818. They're giving you there as, hey, we built these requirements on 171, and we also probably referenced some stuff out of there, but to get what we wanted, this is a good start for anybody that would need it. Thanks, Louis. That's a good point, because I don't think a lot of people know, like, okay, do I have to use 161? Do I have to use 18? I will tell you the one document I would use no matter what is NIST SP 888, which is going to be for all your media sanitization. They have done a little bit of work with that, but even back in the day, it was still pretty good because it gives you templates, it gives you memos, it gives you all kinds of stuff that I wish every one of the other standards had as well.
Any other questions?
And Kim, to yours, Joe normally puts the slide. We have like, I export them out on PDF with addition. I give like a links, any links, or if like the questions Louis asked or anybody else asked, if it's additional guidance I give you, we have like a resource document that goes as well when Joe posts the video.
Yeah, and I can email everyone else out those slides as well as we're going along. We have everyone's there. A couple, while we're waiting for any other questions, I had a couple things I wanted to highlight that were great and may have slipped by people when we were talking about documenting if you're not doing it. One of the things we know has been an issue in the past is, well, that doesn't apply to me. I don't have Wi-Fi. But having those stated clearly that we are not doing Wi-Fi and the policy is we don't have Wi-Fi, and making sure, because that's actually how you will go forward with it. Because in a lot of these cases, getting a not applicable is a whole nother ball of wax, especially in joint surveillance today. Correct, Mike?
Yeah, and I think Nick Del Rosso from the DIBCAC explained this pretty good, but it still comes across to a lot of people the wrong way. A non-applicable means you went back to the program manager or the DoD and said, "Hey, by our contract, we don't have to do this." Which, to Joe's point, that's very hard to do. Putting that statement in that we do not authorize wireless throughout our facility, that is an admin control. You still put a control in place by policy that you're not going to do it. So it's a weird way to word it and think that way. I think a lot of us were like, it's not applicable, we're not doing it. But non-applicable means like by contract, it's not. You don't have the ability to do it. You're not supposed to do it. It's something they put in your contract terms.
Yeah, we had a back and forth when we were originally designing the catapult and building all the questions about that, is adding a non-applicable statement. I got to push back against it because there's always going to be that kind of statements like you really don't want to say not applicable. The worst case, you say yes with additional information and you put in, we don't do this. And then that'll pop up where you need it to be. That could be in a lot of different places. Another point that you made that I want to highlight again too is, and it came up with the names and making sure checking heading footers, but checking and double checking any information about durations and like for an instance we see a lot of is in your system security plan, you may reference passwords and you may put something in there. It doesn't necessarily need to be there, but like we change our passwords every 90 days. Cat passwords have to be 10 characters long. And then you're looking at another document in a policy or a standard, and there it says 8, or here it says 6. Making sure all those line up across there is kind of a tricky one that we've seen people get caught up in. It's easy to correct and it's easy to fix, but as you're an assessor looking at it, those are those kind of little things that kind of like, where are they versus everything's really buttoned up and we know everything is correct on those ones.
That's a good one, Joe.
And Mike, I have one question for you. I don't think you caught it, and if you did say this, I missed it. What about including things like network diagrams or data flow diagrams right within your SSP?
There is no requirement to put them in there. You notice there's a placeholder on that little picture I had showing Catapult. When I went in there, I put my Visio diagram link because I don't want to share my network. Anybody else that needs to see it or that has access to it would have access to that link. Yeah, you don't necessarily have to show it. The description is what you have to give. It says basic overview. So I'm going to give my boundaries. I'm going to give my internal, assets that I'm using. Remember, the biggest key concern to this one is whatever assets you listed that are required by the asset guide as you're doing scoping, that scoping guide says you need to document these within your SSP. That's a good place to start. Is these are the assets that process, store, or transmit CUI. And all my, I don't want to call them generic, but all the templates I've ever done with the DIBCAC or the CAICO in my training, that's kind of the first place I put it, is really high level up front. We have some servers, we have a GCC high environment or a GCC, regular commercial cloud, whatever it is. And that's what we process CUI or FCI with. And then as I go through the requirements, I may list out, just like we were talking about, we use Microsoft, whatever, and I push a link. That is probably one of the biggest things, Joe, because I think a lot of people, they always like, do I have to put a big one in? I've gotten some SSPs on assessments that is seriously a giant network diagram that you can't even see because it's been shrunk down that small. And even when we get into conferences, we'll be like in the conference room on day one, they're still trying to pull that one up. And I'm like, is it, you process CUI on this whole entire thing? You could seriously put, you've seen my diagrams last week, and then they were kind of in the documents this week. I try to make it very simple for the assessor or anybody in my organization to understand these servers are where we store CUI. This part of the cloud is where we store it. And on your workstation, if your organization allows it, we do it here. You will never probably see a mobile device of mine, because the first thing I'd do if I owned a company with that many people, they wouldn't be putting my stuff on their mobile devices. But if you do have it, then put, it would go to Intune or whatever you're using for mobile device management. And that's one of those connections that you need to be aware of. But you don't have to go nuts and put it all. We understand, like, you might have 40 mobile devices. You don't have to put them all on the network diagram. And you could list it out in description and just show it. The idea, Joe, I probably should just stop while I'm ahead, but the idea here is you could have that description. People know what it is. The program manager and even an assessor could get the picture in their head. You'll explain it to me when I talk to you during the assessment. That is your network diagram, is for nobody else.
That's perfect. That's what I was looking at here. And I think one thing, Louis, I'll get to you in a second. When we originally went through our assessment with DIBCAG to become a C3 PAO, my initial SSP, tried to be as helpful as possible. And I had things in there that we were going to be building or we were thinking about building. And the first thing they came back says, well, what are these things? Do we have to come out? And oh, no, I just want to be clear about this. Like, no, get that out of there. Because if it's not part of your SSP, if it's not real, don't put it on there. So only things in scope, only things that are storing CUI, making sure it's clear what's on there. And that was something that just right off the bat, we needed to clean up. Louis, go ahead.
So I had a question that kind of follows up on the system security CA slide. It talked about approvers and authorizers. And so one of the things, again, working at a university, we have a lot of data security standards. We have administrative policies and controls that were already in place and have been approved by, let's say, the governing layers of the institution. Would they go on our list of people and processes if, for example, the Board of Regents, for example, approving SSPs that we might refer to in a system, or standard practice guides that we might refer to in a system security plan? Would they need to be on that list of approvers?
So overall, I would tell you that probably one of the better approaches, and you're not the only one. A lot of people do this because it may be a different department. It may be one of those where we have tiers of the organization. The best statement I think I've seen is we inherit, this, administrative control from this policy or whatever it is coming from the higher level. Whether that's signed off or not, I don't think most assessors are going to be nitpicky about that. We may look at it and go, okay, like I've been out to multiple universities and I get that it takes years sometimes to get something revised and through the whole chain. The idea is that the SSP and whoever owns that environment, that's the person approving your controls. So they should understand like, oh yeah, we're going to inherit some IT practices and policies from whoever it is, corporate, the higher level university infrastructure. And then we would look to see like right underneath there, how do you take that and implement it? If that's what you do, period, that's all you need to have. And then the SSP at the end is like, they like to say endorsed. And then of course I showed you in the rule, they say approved, but endorsed means that that person that's responsible, that you are doing that work for, that you're putting the SSP for, actually said, yeah, I'm good to go with this. It can be an email, it can be whatever. They don't technically have to sign, but that they understand and they are technically approving, yes, go with those controls. I understand that they're in place.
Okay.
Most assessors are not going to be nitpicky. They're going to be nitpicky with stuff that protects the environment at your level. Stuff that constantly gets changed. Like you change tools out, you change computers out, stuff like that is what they're going to look. Is there a high level, like, say ordering process or what you need to order? We'll get that. But like when you get to that nitty gritty, like the OS, the baseline, stuff like that, that might be specific to like, say, a GCC high environment that the rest of the university is not using.
Got it. So things that are specifically going to be impacted and you have direct, or someone at a lower level has direct control over making a change or process, procedure, administrative, technical control, whatever it might happen to be.
Correct. And for a university or anybody that has the SRMs like Louis was talking about, I would expect to see that the policy may be coming from high level university documents. And then the practice or that what they're actually doing is going to come from that third party. That's going to be the requirement is, hey, we're telling you to do this. It's in our policy. And then we're looking at that third party organization, MSP, whoever it is, to actually provide what needs to be done on their side. And Louis, to your point, you can treat yourself like an MSP or whatever it is, like the in-between person, because you're really managing this environment for a specific group of people, not the rest of the university. Especially if you're outsourcing it to like other universities use it, share it, then you almost become your own MSP.
So I have a question, but I'd like to give others an opportunity because it's a level 1 question about system security plans.
I do have another one for it. If nobody has a question, before we move on, Joe and Louis brought up a point that I haven't said yet. One of the things I would recommend is not to start with your SSP. Joe and I went back and forth whether to do the SSP in the beginning or to do it after all the controls. If you have not done your SSP to this day, or it's very basic, you haven't finalized it, hold off until we get through all of the practices and the domains, because that will allow you to build your policies and those statements that you need to put into the SSP. Otherwise, you're going to go back and have to rework it. To Joe's point, I think in my head, normally where I worry about what links and what to put inside my SSP or anything else, or how I'm going to do it. I talk about that during that control, like, oh, you're going to want to put this in your SSP, like a certificate number for FIPS, or, oh, you want to put the person that's responsible here because we need to know it's HR and it's an HR process. Not saying you couldn't get ahead and start working some of the figuring out who does what and what needs to go into each section. But you're going to realize a lot of it comes from policy statements within the policies. You can really put that for almost every control, make it easy, and then link to that policy or procedure.
I know I said this before in a couple other sessions too, but when we went through our assessment, my SSP, my procedures and my policies were, up the entire time during the assessment. So as we were going through the assessment, I knew exactly where to go to show anybody anything they wanted to look at, whether it was the policy statement, whether it's, okay, wait, where am I doing this? Oh, I jump into GCC High, I need to look it into, and here's the path, or here's the screenshot that gets me here. I probably had more in either my procedures or my plan than a lot of people, but it was really for me. So I knew how to get places during my assessment that would make it go by quicker and how I would get there.
Yeah, it's like a map. That's what I love calling it, a catalog. That's really what it is. It's a map, and not just for the assessment. If you heard me before, I like to call it the COVID backup. If that person that used to do it didn't come back from COVID, you should be able to go right to the SSP and figure out what they used.
Anybody else have any questions? Louis, we don't mind you having the floor here. It's not an issue.
Right. So one of the things that you mentioned is that there isn't as much guidance for level 1 SSPs. Would it be safe to assume that some of the techniques or would it be overkill to take some of the techniques that you were using for CMMC level 2 to an SSP for level 1, or would that be way overkill, do you think?
No. So when I taught the level 1 course at the Keiko, I did develop an SSP. I shrunk it down, to those requirements for level 1. And I told everybody in that class, the idea should be in that environment, but right now I don't need to worry about all 110. I need to worry about these basic requirements. So I have them listed out in SSP. And then what I did was going into level 2, I took that and I just expanded it to the 110. I started adding stuff to the domains one by one. So if you're fundamentally doing it, you could go backwards too, Louis. You could have a level 2 environment that you already have the stuff established, but down the road, you don't want everything to be part of your level 2 assessment. So you start stripping those out and you just take out the requirements for level 1 and put it into SSP for the people that only do contract data.
So you do the same thing with, having your environment clearly defined. You would list all the roles, all the people's assets, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Similar. Yeah. Okay.
It's a hard one because you're not by the requirement, you don't have to do it. But it also makes your assessment and your self-attestation for level 1 a lot easier because you can say, no, I have all this documentation. I'm not going to say the government's going to do spot checks or anything, but remember, your program manager can always do spot checks. So they may ask you for that. And if you have it laid out just like you do for level 2, it's a lot easier. It's also, to me, it's a lot easier to keep up with it. It's like, okay, these are the assets I have inside there. Don't have to worry about anything else. It should also help you build a budget to protect FCI on that one side and CUI on the other if you're always doing your asset and your SSP.
So what I'm also hearing is it sounds like the self-attestation is not going to be a submission to SPRS of the SSP, for example, like you would do for CUI.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
It's going to be an attestation letter and that you meet the requirements. And knowing them, it won't be the actual letter. It's going to be the day the letter was signed and who did it.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
I have something on that. I need to look for that. But Louis, we were going to talk about it at the EDUCAUSE one, but we had just so much to talk about. So I didn't talk a lot about level 1.
I'll probably be bringing some level 1 topics to the next EDUCAUSE CPPC because we're doing, maybe this is off topic, but we're doing both level 2 and then for the entire enterprise, we're going to have an enclave, but for Michigan engineering, we're going to have to be doing a gap analysis to make sure that all of our research environments we could do attestations for level 1. So we're creating a bunch of system security plans that we'll want to have in place for individual projects.
Nice.
I think that's about it. Unless Mike or anybody else has any last thoughts, we can wrap up for this session.
Thank you very much.
Great, everyone.
Mike, I was about to say, we're going to start going into practices next.
I know, practices will be next. Yeah, we'll start hitting domains, we'll start hitting practices. So in that, if you have specific practices you want us to talk about, and maybe that's 110 of them, let us know and we'll try and prioritize specific things. Otherwise, we'll take them in order. John and I started a video series way back in the day on level one, just going through the initial practices, what they meant. Of course, that was with CMMC 1.0, and we were trying to keep them to 5 minutes or less. So I don't know if we can do that again, but we'll do something like that, try and break them up, and maybe we'll cover a domain at a time to that extent. But again, we'll have this up, this is being recorded. We will get this up to YouTube. We will get a message out to folks when that is done. I apologize. I don't think I did that last time. I need to get better about that. We'll get everything together for you, but they are out there. And that's it. Thank you all for attending today.
Have a good weekend.